Nyama dunumata la fulanda na kuka to makara la kasata ay walimbe mintole Gambia ndele bada badi bunkali alo nyami nyakili mo nyama dunumata la fulanda na kuka to makara la kasata ay walimbe mintole Gambian Talents TV mbo to wala kale Gambia ndele bada badi bunkali alo nyami nyakili mo nyama dunumata la fulanda na kuka to makara la kasata ay walimbe mintole Gambian Talents TV mbo to wala kale Gambian Talents TV nyulle nata Gambian Talents TV wo nyulle nata kantole kidimandi nyulle nata kantole nganyandi nyulle nata kali se wondi nyulle nata kali kunindi nyulle nata kali londi oto wala tinna ngoebe Facebook le wala tinna ngoebe YouTube wala tinna o ngoebe fanna bela ndabadi bunka Gambian Talents Warning TV boy ngoe wati nkawale la moy wati nkawale jube ndajawaro ngoe badi bunka Gambian Talents TV solemu mbeji mbetema ko sungalango ngoe ko mbeji mbetema komi sungalango taj
I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the sale and sexual exploitation of children, which includes issues of child prostitution and child pornography, and sexual abuse in general of children. So the purpose of my visit here to this country at the invitation of the government of the Gambia was to assess the scope of these issues and their prevalence in the country, and the measures which have been adopted by the government to prevent and combat these crimes, to ensure accountability of the perpetrators, and to provide the necessary recovery and healing to victims of that kind of sexual violence. So, as the resident coordinator just said, it was a 9-day visit, which is it's good in terms of time, because you have an opportunity to meet with a lot of people, but at the same time, it is not enough to have a complete picture of what is going on in this country. So, what I will be saying today, it will be based on my preliminary conclusions. I will do further research once I have left the country, and with the support of the various interlocutors, I will deepen my knowledge of the issues which I've just mentioned. But I can assure you that as a result of my discussion with authorities, my on-site visits, discussion with children themselves, I have a pretty good idea of what the situation is in this country, and I feel comfortable in making a certain number of recommendations to the government, which I feel are particularly urgent to address. As I said, there are urgent matters which need to be addressed, and one of the I would say there are three. The first thing is that even if legislation is in place, institutions have been created to protect children, to prevent children from being subject to violence, there is a real need for additional resources. When I talk about resources, it's not just about funding, it is about providing the various actors with appropriate training and knowledge how to address these issues of sexual violence against children in terms of prevention and as I said in the beginning, recovery and care measures for the children victims of that kind of violence. So resources means also facilities, shelters. Victims of violence need to be taken care of. And victims of children who have been abandoned, picked up in the street because they have been leaving places where they didn't want to be because they were subject to violence, whether it's in the family, whether it's in the schools, including in the Quranic schools. These children should be assisted, and there should be appropriate training for all, in particular law enforcement officials, to identify victims of trafficking, children at risk, to ensure that these children are being referred to the child protection services in this country. And when talking about services, again, there is a clear need for children to be, for these services to be based on real knowledge on how to address these issues. It needs training. So more shelters, more staff equipped and trained to deal with these very difficult issues, and in particular the frontline people, like the police. The police, the Child and Welfare Unit in Banjul, who is the frontline person who receives children who have been sexually abused. It's the tourists in the police. These people need training, and they also need facilities when children who have been victims of that kind of violence come to their place. So that is very important. Then there is very often when I hear about issues of sexual violence, and then when I question whether the criminal has been held accountable, the answer is that the cases, they were not always reported. And I ask, why is that? And the answer is, there is a culture of silence in this country. People don't want to discuss these matters. And even if the child would be willing or is in the position to make an initial declaration at the police, very often, as a result of pressure within the family, these cases are then subsequently dropped. Complaints are being withdrawn. There are settlements amongst families of the perpetrators and the victim, because it is about something which has to do with stigma. People don't want to be identified with that kind of criminal offense, whether as a victim or as a perpetrator. So very often it's under the carpet and the case is not being pursued in court. So this is a very big issue, and therefore there's a need of really sensitization of the society to allow children to speak up and to make parents understand that these are crimes which should be eradicated, and they should certainly not be involved in facilitating these crimes. For instance, if you think of the tourist sector, some of the foreign tourists come here to this country and they think it's easy, girls or boys are easy prey. And sometimes the parents are complicit. They perhaps start asking their child to sell bananas on the beach or fruit, but when it comes to possibility of further financial gains, even by selling their bodies, they're not necessarily stopped by their parents. So it's very important to sensitize the whole of the population about these issues and allow children to avoid being subject to that kind of situation and violence. And I just, as a sideline, would like to mention that I believe that the fact that there are all these hearings and these testimonies in the TRRC can be conducive to creating a better climate where people are more confident to speak out. So I think my visit from that perspective comes at the right time. So there's a real need for sensitizing, awareness raising, and empowerment of the impoverished communities and children to curb this culture of silence. The third issue which I would like to mention is the need for better coordination between all the actors within the ministries, amongst the ministries, and also with other child rights protection actors, civil society, government. Everybody needs to know who does what, and so do the children. Children, they need to know who to turn to. So, for instance, as an example, there used to be a helpline telephone helpline for children victims of violence, sexual violence, that has been stopped for lack of resources. Again, I always have to come back to lack of resources, because, and when I mean resources, it's funding, but it's also training for those who answer the phone. So that needs to be reinstored. There are, apart from all the official structures which are in place, what I find very important, the existence of child protection committees at community level, because that's where people know that things are happening. And so these initiatives at community level, they should be enhanced. They should be encouraged. This should not just be on a voluntary basis. People should be trained and made comfortable in raising issues which are the ones I'm talking about: sexual abuse and sexual exploitation of children. In the tourist sector, again, there are these informal, I don't remember the name now exactly, but there are some structures of amongst help alerting the police about situations which are conducive to sexual exploitation and abuse. I've met a lot of tourist operators, hotel managers, taxi drivers, and that was very revealing of the need to involve them, and they are very, very committed. They feel they have this possibility, but at the same time, what can they do? They're being paid for the trip. So, but if they have a customer who wants to go to a place to find a girl or a boy, they want to know what they can do to denounce that, and how they can themselves overcome all these hurdles which I've mentioned, which has to do with culture of silence. So again, on the tourist sector, even if the hotels and the formal sector is committed to eradicate this, the abusers are now gradually moving to houses, private houses, where they can do where they believe they can do what they like, and so it's very important that the whole licensing system in relation to those kind of places is properly adjusted to track down those who want to abuse children. So there's a lot of reform going on in terms of legislation, constitutional reform, legislative reform is still needed in some areas. One of the areas is the area of child marriage, because there's still a possibility for children to be for child marriage to occur between the age group of 16 and 18. When it's in accordance with customary law. And apart from anything else, even the prohibition of child marriage, which is now illegal in this country, it's not being abided with. There is a lot of pressure, sometimes even after victims of rape are being married by the perpetrator, so that it takes away the accountability, at least because there will be no prosecution in that case. So there are a number of reforms needed, but at the same time, what really matters is the implementation of the laws, which still is pretty weak, and the effective enforcement of the law, as I said, is marred by all these factors which relate to the culture of silence, but also because there is a little bit, I think, a disillusion with the functioning of the judicial system, the law enforcement, because at the end of the day, so far nobody has been convicted for the for a crime of trafficking in this country, in spite of the legislation. Of the world is the issue of sexual exploitation and abuse of children through the internet, where it is children are at risk, and so clearly there is a need for further awareness raising, which can be done at the level of the government, but also needs the involvement of the private sector, and so in particular the internet service providers. And so I know there are reflections ongoing, but it's better to do it today than tomorrow, because this sector is developing very fast, and children need to know what risks they are being exposed to. It's not just being exposed to to grooming. It's also about their images being spread on the internet when they inadvertently believe that they can share sexualized images of themselves, thinking that it will remain between their friends, and so that can leave a very big traumatic impact on children who are subject to that kind of exploitation. I said I had a meeting with a lot of people, but I also visited places, and I visited a Quranic school, and I must say that I'm concerned about these schools because the Talibis are in these settings are not under the radar of the child protection services. Leaving aside the limitation of the curriculum, which doesn't include the preparation for livelihood at a later stage, the child protection issues are of concern to me. And I believe that there is a real need to identify the location and the license and ensure that these institutions are properly licensed and monitored. A lot needs to be done about identification of children who are vulnerable, children on the move, children who cross the borders, children who again have fled from abusive conditions, and it is important that that everybody concerned is aware of and is familiar with the identification of that kind of situation, to identify, for instance, victims of trafficking, that they should not be returned where they came from. That is something where you need training. The police is in dire need of getting that information and training. I have already mentioned the investigation and the law enforcement, so in addition to the initial hurdle of bringing cases to the police, there is disillusion with the functioning of the judicial system, the fact that sometimes evidence is not in gathering is regarded as very difficult, and if insufficient, leads to the culprits to be released from any prosecution. So the functioning of the judicial system is crucial, just as much as I believe the importance of the care and recovery and the rehabilitation of victims. There should be specific dedicated shelter with dedicated staff for victims of trafficking and sexual exploitation, and the one and only single shelter in this country can simply not cope with that, knowing also that, of course, when abuse occurs, it can occur in any part of the country, and it should not be simply, and one should therefore consider the creation of shelters and reception structures with adequate staff also in other parts of the country. And so let me just then conclude to say that I believe that the Gambia has come a long way to put in place impressive laws, policies and child protection measures. But the need for additional resources to make all this work is really very clear, and I think there should be additional efforts at all levels to ensure that there is uncompromising enforcement to the delivery, to deliver results, the results which these laws and institutions have set themselves to start with, and to achieve societal changes which are needed to make discussions on these issues possible. And the media are absolutely crucial in this respect. So I really appreciate that you are here today, because you can also talk about these things. Not just what is happening in the TRRC, but also about what I'm concerned about. So I really appreciate that, and I think that Gambian Society as a whole deserves it, but above all, the children who are either victims already or who are at risk, unless the society is sensitized to all these issues. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm of course open to questions if you have any specific issues which you would like me to develop any further. And if you could identify yourself when you speak.
I'm Omar Bar, of course, from the Standard newspapers. I have 4 questions. They are all follow-ups to, of course, what you just said. The first one is, we have seen Gambia backsliding, of course, in the U.S. trafficking and passing report from Tier 2. What is Tier 3? The 2019 TIP report said the Gambia does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking of people, including children, and is not making significant efforts to do so. After your brief 9-day visit, what are your impressions? One. The other one is the U.S. also the same TIP says sex traffickers increasingly host child sex tourists in private residence outside the commercial tourist areas of Banjul, making the crime harder to detect. They also said Gambian boys attend Quranic schools in Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Senegal, and some corrupt teachers force their students into begging, street vending, and of course agricultural work. Your time here is limited, of course, we know that, 9 days. But have you made interactions with people in the tourism industry and Quranic schools, and what have you learned from them as far as protection of these children are concerned? And the other thing is the records of Gambia Anti-Trafficking Agency is successfully pre-skating, of course, alleged traffickers has been abnormally low since its establishment. Many observers been this down to their low funding, inadequate staff, which is at 9 as far as I know, and lack of skilled investigators. What could the UN help in this direction? During your brief stay, have you met children who may have been victims of trafficking or so?
I'm Kebaki from Victoria. I just read the press release that was sent ahead, and then you did say that you will seek to help the Gambian government in addressing this problem. But then there are reports actually that are being reported in the media, where even the victims of these trafficking, they did say that they were taken to these places, and then until when they arrived, actually, what is actually found is an evidence that they were taken, and then the government is actually aware of the fact that these people were taken, but yet the government did not take any step to investigate, no visible step, to investigate this matter. And then I read some reports that even implicated the immigration department, but then no of such investigation have been carried out by government. In fact, you can say that you do not see any seriousness, from the side of government in addressing this trafficking issue. So, did you actually meet the Gambian government and then talk about this issue and what might have been their response? You also talked about children selling bananas in the street, which is also very obvious in the Gambia. But then if you ask parents about this, what is the cause, they normally justify, which is not also justified, but their justification is poverty. What is your view on this, and then how do you seek to redress this problem?
Yeah, let's have a woman.
A child who was abducted around Baptist, and luckily, as soon as we reported the story, the following day, the child was retrieved, but far away from where they were abducted from, in somewhere in Kalinding, by a Good Samaritan. When this Good Samaritan tried to return the child to the police said they don't have the right facilities to take care of this child, and returned that child back to the Good Samaritan. Had it not been a good Samaritan, maybe, who knows, it would have been a double abduction. When the child was found in a gutter, bruises around their neck, on their face, what can you do to make sure that the police can fill in this gap? One, by actively going out to find the children if they, as a case of abduction, and secondly, to have the right facilities to make sure that they can keep that child and reunite them with their family and parents. I already listened to you. Thank you so much. You talked about the lack of facilities. What can be done to, first of all, ensure that our security services do their job, and then there is somewhere for these children if they are
Okay, thank you for these questions. You have in a way answered already the questions, because the need for security for police to proactively search for victims of violence and abandonment is very obvious. They can't just sit in their office and wait till something happens. But the problem is really the resources. I mean, there are very few people who are staffing these various units, the TSUs, for instance, also the Child and Welfare Unit in Banjo Police headquarters. They're totally understaffed, under-resourced. So there's the proactive side of their responsibilities is being neglected. They just can't do it. So the facilities are number one. Also because of the need for privacy for victims, it's totally unacceptable that victims of that kind of violence are being held in these premises, which are basically offices. To take a child to a hospital, the police is sort of required to take her own or his own vehicle to go there. It takes time to get a child welfare officer to be available as well from the Ministry of Social Welfare, from the Department of Social Welfare, so all this is also related, and I think you should be aware of that as well, that there's an enormous turnover in the police. So people who are sort of getting acquainted with the procedures which are necessary, what needs to be done when you're confronted with the victim. By the time they really know and they have been trained, they are moved to another part of the department, and there are new staff arriving who need to be trained again. So all this has to be reflected upon, so that the professionalism and the child-friendly nature of the way the police is addressing these issues can be secured more than it is today. So resources, facilities, and training. That is my answer to the last question. Now I will turn to the earlier questions. On the trafficking, yes, of course, I have read the TIP report of the United States, but that is not my only source of information. It would be inappropriate for me to exclusively rely on one source to assess the situation, and that's why I've come here. So I have met with the persons who are in charge of the trafficking unit, clearly it brings me back to what I said just a moment ago. Also, it needs training to have skilled investigators. The investigation unit is a very small unit. and they are in dire need of further training, so that they are appropriately also preparing the whole file for the prosecution department. Because I mean, if that is not done properly at that level, the risk that the traffickers evade justice is very, very likely, and so it needs absolutely further training. I have met with children who had been trafficked. I've been visiting this Bakoto Center. Is it called Bakoto? Yes. Children who are there are severely traumatized young girls, in addition to a series of young boys who were there, obviously temporarily. Again, their temporary stay in that center is because it is temporary. It's certainly not the solution. There's inadequate facilities. There is no security. The wall is far too low. I mean, people can come in, and there have been stories of girls and boys evading from this center, from this shelter, and then, of course, running away and running the risk of again being subject to issues of trafficking, sexual violence, and so on. So then coming to the Quranic schools, I have mentioned it already. Your question was whether I have been seeing this with my own eyes. Yes, I have. Of course, I didn't see the children begging because they were there, and I was visiting them, and my visit was announced on very short notice. So, I'm afraid I haven't seen all of it. I've seen that particular school. But already that, I mean, even if I haven't seen these children begging in the street, I've seen the living conditions there and the sanitary conditions, which are totally inadequate. So that is definitely something where the government needs to focus on and seek support also from expert institutions in which child protection is simply not on, cannot continue to exist. They should be closed down if that kind of situation is verified. So yes, I've met with many children in the shelters, children who are also very committed to participate in this whole sensitizing campaign which is needed in the country, and these children are extraordinary. I mean, children of the Youth Parliament, children who belong to who are members of the Voices of the Young in the media. These children are really, I think, absolutely essential multipliers of the messages which are needed to ensure that the society is willing to open up to this kind of discussion, and really not only discuss it but really act, because it is about denouncing an issue of sexual violence. It's not about just talking amongst yourselves. You have to bring it to the police. You have to make sure that these crimes are being prosecuted. But for that you need awareness, community involvement, and children are willing to help there. Also, as members of the community committee, child protection committees, they are part of it. Some of them are more outspoken than others, but I think the mere fact that they exist and that they comprise young people is a very positive step. Somebody asked whether I've met the Gambian government. Yes, I've met many ministers, agencies, immigration department, ombudsman, the National Human Rights Commission, Minister of Information and Communication, the Minister of of Women's, Children and Social Welfare, Minister of Tourism. So I have had an ample opportunity to discuss and listen to the measures which have been put in place. And again, institutions, laws exist, but very often the lack of resources prevents the impact which is being sought by the creation of these structures and laws. Yes, that is basically what I would like to say in answer to these questions.
I like to call you from West Coast Radio. Now, according to the United Nations Human Rights Commission, a working visit is not a fact-finding mission. Of course, it is between a mix of technical assistance, mediation, and the development of best practices and public awareness on human rights. Now, Uganda has been penalized by the United States and for not doing enough on child trafficking, as mentioned. How will this visit be able to help Uganda to get out of that suspension? And also, there has been instances in other countries, perhaps during the dictatorial regime of Jammeh, many times African countries will tell you, you have no business or interfere in our internal issues. But let's say, was there any attempt by the Uganda government to evade, accountability or try to flip-flop, on the issues of child sale and child exploitation?
Okay, so this is a monitoring visit. A monitoring visit of 9 days obviously is not the same as a permanent presence in the country and an objective assessment over months and years. But because of this is how the special rapporteurs operate. They meet with key actors of civil society, government, other agencies at local and at central level to gain impressions on the basis of my assessment and also of the information received beforehand, because I put a call for input on my website, so everybody could contact me and submit concerns or whatever information prior to the visit. There was very little information in this respect, but nonetheless, on the basis of my research carried out before the mission, also the input received by UN agencies, I had let's say, a global picture of what exists in terms of structures and legislation, but I really wanted to meet with the people to see how it works in practice, and this is what I have been doing over the last 9 days. As a result of that, I will convey these impressions not only today, because as I said in the beginning, these are preliminary observations. I will further deepen the research needed. If I will seek to get more information in the course of the coming months, so that my report has a solid and sound basis. And on that basis, I will make recommendations. Recommendations by the Special Rapporteur are only what it says, recommendations. They're not binding. It's really up to the government to implement them, but it is presented within the international community. And the government of the Gambia is expected to comply with its legal obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the optional protocol on the sale and sexual exploitation of children, which are two instruments which the government of the Gambia has ratified. So apart from my perspective, there are monitoring procedures before the Committee on the Rights of the Child in Geneva, in which all these issues will come back. And there is a good coordination between my independent assessment and the independent assessment of the Committee on the Rights of the Child. So I rely on what their recommendations are, and they rely on my recommendations, so that there's interaction, and it's also because there's no point in going in all sorts of directions. We are all concerned with the respect of the rights of the child of children in the Gambia, and that their best interest prevails over all other considerations. So this is the point, and the child trafficking issue is a serious issue. There is no proper referral mechanism, which is one of the things which was denounced in the TIP report, and that the government will certainly has already noted that there is a need for this. As I said before, the investigators need to be trained, and there should be a much stronger presence in the field or near the border. In the border area, so that these victims are properly not only identified but properly referred to the child protection system. And the linkage between the activities of the NATIF and the child protection system has to be strengthened, and that will be part of my recommendations. So this is basically what should happen. Your question whether the government is evading or has been evading.
Was there an attempt to evade?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, I have met with all the interlocutors I have asked for to meet, so there is definitely nothing of that sort. I have been welcomed by all the persons I've asked to meet, and I have been really going into in depth into all these issues. And I got the answers which I was looking for. I have no situation whatsoever in which I felt that somebody was evading the truth. So this is my assessment. Whether it's enough, that's another matter, and that I have already hinted at. There are things which need to be done, but the government is aware of it. What is very important in this context, and it sounds I'm coming back all the time to that, the resources, and perhaps one of the important things is that there should be more priority focus on children's rights in this country. That is something I think that message I hope has come across and will across through this message. Yeah. A last question, yeah.
When it is not through spiritual means. And another thing, also, some of our schools here, the leaders also suffer spiritual
appropriate resources for these services, these facilities to take place. But most importantly, another lesson which I want to point out from experience. One Norwegian by the name of Sven Sanderson was given a 3-year jail term, 3 years, in order to pay $600,000 fine in 2012 for abusing 6 children. First of all, is this sufficient? This Norwegian was eventually pardoned, and this pardon was reversed. It was a very close call to actually releasing this man back into our society. God knows what more damage he would have caused. My question is, are those sort of, punishments that they've given sufficient? And most importantly, do we, at the moment, as we speak, does the Gambia have the necessary processes in place whereby if a pedophile is traveling through our immigration system trying to get through, we will be able to identify such? It takes cooperation with other governments. Do we have these procedures in place?
Sorry?
The provinces.
Yes.
To know what is actually also happening. Because when it comes to children begging, I think it's common here. I went to Farafenni and I conducted some interviews there with the people in the community. And I have talks. I went to Farafenni and I conducted some interviews there with the people in the community, and I had talks with a chat with the children there who begs on the street, and these are children that are taken to a Quranic school, but they are also being labeled, like put into label, in the form of going to beg for food and taking it back to the school or to the master. Yeah. And I spoke to people within the community, how do they see these things? And the answer I got was that these children have been exploited into this. And then again, they are also the ones suffering this, because these children eventually, now they are scared, because if they don't have money to take back to the master, or they don't have food to take it back to the man,
they will beat them. So it makes them to go and steal. I got a scenario there, and it happened the same morning, where the children, I think two of the children went into a supermarket to steal something just to take it back because they don't have the policemen that arrest them. I don't know whether these are things
The question of budget.
that you guys are also putting into consideration or trying to reach out to the
I think it reflects what I just said. I think
more.
more focus on children means also more budget for the Ministry of Social Welfare, for the Ministry of Children and Women, and in particular the Department of Social Welfare. Currently, there was some. I asked about the budgetary allocation. It was there was some argument, but it's sort of around 5% of the national budget. I think that if that could be increased considerably, there would be it would be much easier for that ministry to implement the intentions of enhancing the child protection policies. There was yes, and then the second question which you referred basically related to a particular case and the low penalties assigned to somebody who had committed the worst of the crimes you can imagine. I think in terms of legislation, the penalties which relate to sexual abuse and exploitation are pretty good. The question is really the implementation and how this law is being applied, because as I said, I have heard of no conviction in the period of apart from this particular incident, nobody seems to have to be convicted, or and that is the problem. I have been to the lower river region, and I have met with the child protection communities and educational authorities. And as I said, I have also been visiting Adara, but the issues you raise are of course are very serious issues, and I know there has been an attempt because these children they're not only forced to beg, but to bring that to their marabout, but they also are very hungry. They're hungry. These children need to be properly fed, and the exploitation is one side of it, but their health is another issue. And I think therefore that this system of cash transfer, which has been initiated in respect of 17 identified schools, which means that they would receive a cash transfer from the Ministry of Education, provided that they can offer insurance that there is no begging involved in their structure, is something which could be scaled and provide a better protection for these children. It is forcing children to beg is a form of child labor which is totally unacceptable and not acceptable under any conditions under international human rights law. So it is something which where law enforcement should identify the victims, take them away and protect them and offer them the protection that these children need. Because the way they are currently without, as I said, under the radar of the child protection services is really very detrimental to the development of these poor children who are really in awful conditions.
We have the right international collaboration to identify such people. I mean, other countries have a sexual offenders list.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah. Yes, no, I mean, the thing is that when it comes to sexual exploitation in the tourist sector, you have really registered in other countries sexual pedophiles, and those are identified by Interpol, and there is cooperation, there is the Green Notice, which on the basis of cooperation between the various police authorities would be easily identified. But there are also, say, the occasional abusers, and they are of course not registered. So a reason the more to, to be vigilant and to go out and to ensure that there is awareness raising and that cases of that kind are identified preventively. There have been a lot of awareness raising specifically in this area by the Ministry of Tourism, billboards, also youth organizations have been doing a lot of work there. But as I said, the fact that this is slowly moving to private compound is a problem, but can be addressed through the licensing system. I wanted to say something else, but it escapes me now. Well, okay. So, right.
So my question is, do we have the right of systems in place or not? Like right now, from what you have seen.
Yes.
Are we at that point ready for it?
No, it needs more. It needs more proactive involvement. The police is there. There's the TSU, but there are only 1 or 2 people sitting in their office. What can they do? They need more staff and training to know how to proceed with these cases and to prevent this from happening. I was really going to say something which I believe was important here, but I... Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, I just wanted to add some elaborate on Farafenni issue. It's a border between Gambia and Senegal, and you have distance going there. And maybe taking these children to Dara there is advantage, but sometimes some of them that graduate from there, they graduate not only with the knowledge, but they become people that still, they can open somebody's door with when it is locked through spiritual means. You see? And another thing, most of some of our schools here, the girls also suffer spiritual problems there. They go to school normal, but in the school, some of these girls will start falling down unconscious, as the man said before, they found somebody in a gutter. Sometimes you see a girl missing. We had a girl who was missing for 3-4 days, but she was not kidnapped. But spiritually, people just don't know where she went until she will call and come back. These are also challenges that
there are a lot of challenges, absolutely. And let me also say that I believe that if the access to education functions properly as promoted by the Ministry for Education, that will also add to the protective environment of children. Not only because they learn, they are in a location which is supposed to be secure, but also because they learn through their learning process and their education, their vulnerability at the end of the day is being reduced because they are learning skills and they're acquiring knowledge which allows them not to be dependent on revenue which is the result of exploitation. So this being said, I also made a very strong point of making sure that even within the education sector, children are not subject to sexual violence, because there again, not only it can occur because children amongst themselves are sometimes involved in forced sexual relationship, but also the teachers need to be filtered and screened so that we can be sure that children are really safe in schools. That's another matter.
I think we can stop here and we wait for the report, which is going to be released early next year.
Yes, but before that, thank you very much. I will issue tomorrow a press release in Geneva, but that will be, of course, shared with the media community at large. And in this press release, there will be a link to my end of mission statement, which will be a presentation of my preliminary findings. So I have, in the course of my discussion with you today, I've given you an indication of what it is, but there will be much more detail in this end of mission statement, which will be, there will be a hyperlink to that statement in the press release, so you will have further information there. And then, as the resident coordinator just said, there will be an extensive report at a later point in time, but I need time for that. I don't want to get it wrong.
Thank you very much for coming, but so that, in meantime, if there is any report, any input that we can share, we can still receive them and share with her, and she work on the report.
Absolutely, absolutely.